Let me pray first. Lord, we thank you that we can come before you today and study your word and listen to you and let you speak to our hearts this morning. God, I just ask you to be with me this morning, help me to say the words that you want me to say, and let this be from your heart, and just bless it this morning. Amen. Okay, so we've been studying Acts, and we're continuing today with Acts chapter 17. I'm not going to read all the chapter. I'm going to summarize some and read a few verses. But this is kind of the tale of three cities, as it were. We've got Thessalonica, Berea, and Athens. And one thing to note is that Luke is not on this part of the journey, or not on this journey with Paul. The first person we becomes third person they here. So this is almost kind of a summary that he's getting from other people, obviously. And we're looking at, let's start this. So Thessalonica was first, and Paul has a method when he goes into a new place. So I'll read it, verse 2. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, saying, "This Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks and not a few of the leading women. Okay, so Paul goes in and he's going into the synagogue and he's sharing with them from the Scriptures, and basically showing them from the Scriptures that Jesus is the Son of God. He fulfilled the prophecies, and bringing them to Christ and the knowledge of Christ. But a lot of the converts in Thessalonica were Greek converts. And the Jewish leaders got very jealous. And so they basically ran him out of town. They looked for him. They brought Jason in, who was housing him because they couldn't find Paul. And they said, you're these men, and this is in verse 6, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also." And Jason received them, and they're acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there's another king, Jesus. So they accuse them of, coming against Caesar, and say that some translations say, instead of turn the world upside down, they say they're changing the world. They're making trouble all over the world. In whatever case, they were not happy with what they were doing. And they probably don't mean this particular set of people. They're probably being general and speaking of Christians in general. It's been 19 years since Jesus ascended, about 19 years, and the Holy Spirit has come to Pentecost. It seems like a long time, but when you're traveling by foot and you're walking around and staying in cities for a while, you're not going to get very far very fast in that time. But the Christians and the disciples and apostles have gained a reputation for going in and changing things. Then they go, so they get Paul out of Thessalonica, and they send him to Berea. And Berea is a whole different atmosphere. He goes into the synagogue there, and verse 11 says, "Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Many of them therefore believed, with not a few Greek women of high standing, as well as men. So these people were anxious to hear. But they didn't take it at his word. They wanted to study for themselves. They studied the scriptures. They searched out, and they proved through the word that what Paul was saying was true. So we have now the Berean study, the Berean school of the Bible, and they're getting that from Berea. Here come the Jews from Thessalonica. They learned that they're here, and so they bring a group down and make trouble again. So the Christians, fearing for Paul, at this point, he's been beaten, he's been thrown in jail. They're trying to protect him. So they get him out of town again, and they bring him to Athens. Now, Athens is the religious center of the Greco-Roman world. It is the center of beauty, art, culture, and knowledge for this area. At this time, it's about 400 years after it's what we call its golden era, but it's still very much a center of learning, knowledge, lots going on there. And it's religious in the sense that there's every religion under the sun there. It's not that they're devout Jews. They are everything. Everything is there. And the philosophers and the philosophies are abundant, as are the idols to all the gods. There's lots of superstition here. There's lots of adultery here. And in verse 16 it says, "Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, 'What does this babbler wish to say?' Others said, 'He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection.' So they take him and they start questioning him. And he ends up going and speaking in the Areopagus. I don't know if I'm saying that right. We also call it Mars Hill. That's the other translation of it. So he does this sermon on Mars Hill, sermon of sorts, and he brings out the idol to the unknown God. And he talks to them about this altar that he's seen. And he says, starting in, verse 23, midway, "I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives all mankind life and breath and everything." He goes on to actually quote some of their poetry and philosophy. And what's interesting about this is he does not quote scriptures here. He doesn't quote from the Bible at all, because that's not their background. That's not where they're coming from or where they're at. He does, in this little sermon, though, speak to almost every religion and philosophy there. We could go, I'm not going to, but in detail of every little line speaks to something. And that's not the direction I'm going this morning. But he basically takes what they understand and know and builds a bridge to the gospel. And it's something that even missionaries today do if they're in a foreign country. they study the religion. We had some friends who were missionaries in India for years. And it's amazing to hear. I wish I had the knowledge that they have, because it's interesting to hear how they would talk about, how they would minister to Hindus who are also kind of like these people in Athens. They just take it all in. And that's what Athens was doing. It was like, we don't want to leave anybody out. Let's just get it all in here. And in case we've forgotten anybody, let's do this altar to the unknown God, because we don't want to offend anybody. Interesting, when I was thinking about that, we don't want to offend anybody. Nobody wants anybody to offend anybody. Does that sound familiar? Today, how, you're not supposed to offend people with anything. But, and Paul had a way of speaking that he didn't offend. He used what they knew and tried to bring them to the gospel without offense. He spoke truth, but he used wisdom in speaking the truth. And back to the missionaries, the Indian missionaries would take like a ceremony or a blessing or an offering and talk to the Hindus about it and say, you have this and we have this, which is like, this. And I wish I could give you an example, but I don't know enough. But it's amazing how they are able to do that and build a bridge and connect the two. And that's the method that Paul uses here. So these are the 3 cities. And I'm going to go back now to kind of what I felt like I needed to talk about today. In the first part of the scriptures, in the city of Thessalonica, when they said, "These men who've turned the world upside down have come here also." When I read that, I thought, wow, these guys were changing things. They were changing things for Jesus, which is good, because it could be changing things for worse. But it made me think of, there was a lady, well, everybody knows I work at Lee High School, and when I went there, I did not want to go there. But God made it very clear. He put that job in my lap, and the first time I heard about the job, I said, "Oh no, Lord, I don't want to." And then I heard about it again and again within 2 days. 3 different people. And I thought, I was stubborn. I said, I'm not going to apply. I'm not going to do it. God, I'm not going there. I knew the first time it was God. But I was being stubborn. Anyway, then they turned around and called me. Without me applying. Then it's God, right? And they got my name from somebody. And they called me. So I took the job. But I was not happy. The whole first year, I was pretty agitated that God had me there. And after a few months, I started to settle in and get to know my students and get to know people and realize that this truly God had placed me in a place of ministry. You can't be there and not feel that way. And so many of the instructors there are Christians. And I cannot tell you how many pastors actually teach there. But going into this year, I've had a different attitude. It's the end of the year now. And I can't tell you how blessed I've been this year, just letting God use me the way He wanted to. We are limited as teachers, but when they ask, we can share, and we have our ways. This is on video, but Al said he won't post it if I don't want him to. So anyway, it's been amazing though. We have had some amazing experiences in the classroom in opening up and letting students share. And anyway, the story I'm trying to get to is there was a lady that came kind of near the end of the first semester, and we were dealing with a student. She works in a community outreach, and she was working with a student. There was a problem with the student, and we needed to have something done. But it wasn't the typical, this is how we do it thing. And so she and I were walking around from person to person, from office to office, trying to get this problem solved. And in the course of our conversation, as we were walking, we both found out we were both Christians, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about changing things, and something was said about rocking the boat and this and that. And near the end, I said, I know this is where God's put me, and I know God sent me here, but it's not always easy. And she looked at me and she said, "You're here because God needed an agent of change in this place." That's pretty sobering for somebody to say to you. And, I have prayed since that day, Lord, make sure I'm representing you well in this place. I don't want to be not doing my job, or being rebellious against a system, or being seen as, oh, she calls herself a Christian, but look how she does her job. And there are people there that are spoken negatively about that claim to be Christians. And I've just prayed every day, Lord, don't let me be one of those people. Let me represent you well. I want to reach out and minister, but I want to do my job in excellence and make sure that I am representing Christ where I'm at. So, thinking of this change agent, what is a change agent? What are these people? What does an agent of change look like? So I looked up on the internet and found a little information. First of all, let me read you some of and this is from a business perspective, but I think you'll see it so ties in with ministry and living the Christian life. The characteristics of a change agent, some of them, are that they have a clear vision and can communicate it to others. They're knowledgeable. They lead by example. They have strong relationships that are built on trust. They ask tough questions. And they're patient yet persistent, because change doesn't happen overnight. And so I think we can all agree that Jesus is the greatest change agent ever. He changed the world. He changes us. He continues to. When he comes into our life, he changes our future. He improves our lives. He makes things better. Some examples of biblical change agents were Daniel, Esther, Moses, Nehemiah. More modern change agents would be Martin Luther, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr. And I don't know how many of you like change. Do you like change? Not very many people like change. Change is not something that is comfortable. It's uncomfortable to change. But it's required sometimes. And people don't like to change, especially if it has to do with how they were raised, how they've always done it, what they know. The unknown is uncomfortable, and changing what I do is uncomfortable. So if you're going to be a change agent, you have to meet people where they are. You have to be, Paul had a vision of Jesus on the Damascus Road. Christ was revealed to him, and he knew that he knew that he knew, because he had met Jesus face to face, that this is what this is. And he was able to communicate that. We all have our own testimony of how God revealed himself to us and how he continues to in our lives. And we need to be able to share that with other people clearly. Paul had knowledge. He was educated both in the public, secular education and religious education, and he was able to tie those in together. We need to be knowledgeable of the Word, and today more than ever, we need to be able to defend why we believe what we believe, and we need to be able to speak with people about it in a loving way with wisdom, where we are, I won't say I think it's okay sometimes to offend, but in today's world of tolerance, you have to speak your words in a way that still communicates Christ's love. Does that make sense? And sometimes people see hate behind what we say. And I'm not saying we have to bend to culture, but we have to be relevant and we have to be loving. It's a tool. It's a tool we have to use to reach others. And we have to lead by example. We have to be, people are watching us all the time, what we're doing. And if we aren't careful, then and our actions don't match our words, then we can get caught. Paul and the other disciples, they didn't quit, even though they were thrown in jail, even though they were beaten. They continued to serve, to go, to share the gospel. We have to build relationships with people. It's that saying that we all know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I was talking to a teacher in the hall the other day, and there was a student that was not where she was supposed to be. And I was fussing at her in the hallway like I was her mama, because that's the way I speak to most of my students. And there was a teacher right in front of me, and she laughed. And she said, "You fuss at your students like I fuss at mine." And she said, "You know what's funny is not all teachers can do that." She said, "Because they will come to my classroom and they will be griping about, this teacher said this to me." And she said, "I say the same thing to you." And they said, "Yeah, but you're you." And she said, "I've decided what it is it's the relationship that they have with their students." She said, "But I don't know how I form that relationship, I just do. And they accept it from me." And it's the same way with me. I don't know how I do, but I do. And, you form those relationships, and then you're able to correct. Because they know it comes from love. And if we don't do that with people, the song we sang, the David Crowder song, "Come, Weary Sinner." And I thought, oh Lord, that needs to be this church.
Amen.
We need to say to them, we love you just like you are.
Amen.
And a lot of them feel like they are not good enough to step through that door.
Right.
Because of what Christians have told them, because of what they've heard, and because of that attitude that they've seen in Christians. And I'm not at all saying we need to water things down. We need to speak the truth. Our goal is to share the gospel, just like Paul, to speak Jesus. His death and resurrection is the answer. All the things that are going on in the world, Jesus is the answer. You know that old song, Jesus is the answer for the world today. It's true.
Amen.
It doesn't matter what president is in power. It doesn't matter what Congress is doing. Jesus is the answer. And we need to share that with others. But we've got to have a relationship. We've got to get to know them. We've got to know what they need and where they're at. And we need to accept them where they're at. And build that relationship, so then in love we can correct. We can speak into their lives. You cannot speak into anyone's life without having a relationship there first. And it does take time. It takes time. We can't expect people to walk through the door a mess and be cleaned up overnight. We can't expect them to come in and be perfect. We are not perfect. I am not perfect. I am working on myself every day. And we all should be striving to get closer. Jesus asked questions. He was good at, when somebody asked him a question, he answered them with a question. And asking probing questions. We need to ask tough questions of people, but we need to ask tough questions of ourselves. And we need to make sure we're where we need to be and constantly examine ourselves. And so, I'm doing good. I'm almost done. We need to be striving to be agents of change, not let the atmosphere and the environment and society and culture change us, but we need to be working to change it. And it may be in our homes with our families, it may be in our workplace, or for students it'll be classrooms and schools and colleges, campuses, and in our community, starting with our neighborhood, our neighbors, and spreading out. Our goal is still the same, to share the gospel. And we need to do it by being ourselves, not trying to be anybody different. God gave us all talents. He gave us all abilities. And we just need to use those abilities and talents, whatever they are. We need to be listening for God's voice and obeying what He asks us to do, even though that may take us out of our comfort zone a little bit. Just be obedient. And then we shouldn't limit ourselves. The disciples didn't sit there and say, but there are only 12 of us. Oh, we don't have anybody, They were empowered by the Holy Spirit, and they went and did what they were called to do. They followed Jesus' example, and they just shared Him. And so we shouldn't limit ourselves, that we're small. We don't have a worship leader. We don't have, a children's pastor yet. But we can still share God's love with people. We can still bring them in and love on them. And that should be our goal.